When I refused to let my husband's sister borrow my car, she spread a vicious lie claiming I had hit her child. Enraged, my husband ferociously snapped, "Just apologize to keep the peace." Instead, I immediately called someone who would not stand for such deceit. The next morning, as she opened her door, her face transformed to a shade of panic and she nearly fainted when she discovered who was standing there. I'm 41, living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I've been married to Mark for nearly 9 years. It's just the two of us, no kids, and we both work full-time. Overall, things are fine, except for one ongoing problem in our marriage, my brother-in-law's sister, Becca. Becca is the kind of person who believes everyone owes her something. She's always asking for favors without ever returning the gesture. She borrows items and somehow ends up breaking or losing them, yet never takes responsibility. She never says thank you or apologizes, she just keeps taking. It all started when she asked to borrow my car. It was a Thursday afternoon while I was at work, and I got a text from her saying, "Hey, can I borrow your car this weekend? My car's in the shop and the kids are driving me crazy." I had plans to take the kids to Carowinds, so without hesitation I replied, "No, I need my car for work and errands, and honestly, I don't trust you behind the wheel." I remembered the last time I lent her my lawnmower. She returned it with a cracked blade and no explanation. Besides, I know how she treats her own stuff, always ending up in the repair shop because she drives like the road belongs to her. I texted back, "Sorry, I really need it for work and can't risk it." She replied with a shrug and a laughing emoji, "Worth a shot, UG, okay." That was the end of it, or so I thought. Sunday night, after returning from the grocery store, my phone immediately went off with texts, missed calls, and voicemails from friends, neighbors, even some people I barely know. "Is everything okay with Becca's kid? Did something happen in your driveway?" They were all asking. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone, trying to figure out what was happening. I hadn't seen Becca or her kid in days. Finally, I called her, and she answered right away, sounding as casual as if we were just old friends chatting. I asked directly, "Why is everyone asking if something happened with your kid? Did you tell them I hit him?" She replied, "Oh yeah, sort of, but it's not a big deal. I didn't want to make a fuss." I paused, thinking I must have misheard her. "What?" I asked. She laughed and said, "Relax, I just mentioned that you bumped him with your car the other day. He's fine, just a little bruise." I hadn't seen her kid for over a week, I hadn't even been near their house, and there she was, claiming I hit her child with my car. I told her she needed to set the record straight immediately, but she just brushed me off. "It's not that serious, don't make a big deal out of it." I hung up and told Mark what was going on. He was on the couch, half watching a football game and half scrolling on his phone. I showed him the texts and explained exactly what Becca had said. He just shrugged and said, "Just apologize, you know how she is. Let's keep the peace." I stared at him for about 30 seconds, waiting for him to understand how absurd it was to apologize for something that never happened, a lie she had fabricated and spread throughout the neighborhood. "Absolutely not," I insisted. "Babe, come on." But he persisted, "It's Becca, she's never going to change. Just say sorry and let her have it." That's when I realized I had to take matters into my own hands, because if I let this slide, Becca would continue her lies, stir up more drama, and get away with it. I decided to call my friend Jenna, who works for Child Protective Services. We've been close since high school, and I trust her more than anyone. I didn't call her as a friend, though I called her as someone who handles real cases of child abuse and neglect every day. I asked her a simple question. If someone claims their kid was hit by a car but never reported it, and the child isn't being checked out, would CPS look into it? Without hesitation, she said, "Yes, absolutely." "Who's the kid?" I explained everything, the fake story, the texts, and the fact that I hadn't been anywhere near them, and how Becca was trying to portray me as a reckless driver who didn't even apologize. Jenna said, "Okay, I'll arrange a welfare check first thing in the morning." That's when I knew things were about to get serious. At 9 a.m. sharp, Becca received an unexpected visit. She assumed it was just another tall tale to gain sympathy and maybe tarnish my reputation, but CPS doesn't mess around. They showed up at her door with a police officer. They asked to see her son, questioned her about the alleged accident, took notes, snapped photos, inspected her house, and asked why she hadn't taken him to the hospital if he was hurt, why no report was filed, and why no one else had seen anything. And Becca completely unraveled. A neighbor across the street later told me that Becca answered the door in her robe, hair a mess, with a cup of coffee in hand, as if she'd just rolled out of bed. Within 20 minutes, she was red-faced, stammering, and couldn't keep her story straight. The best part? Her kid was perfectly fine, no marks, no bruises, no scratches. The officer took her statement, CPS documented everything, and Becca ended up with a citation for filing a false report. But that wasn't the most satisfying part. Once word spread that CPS had been called to check on Becca's kid, more of her lies started to emerge. It turned out this wasn't the first time she'd fabricated a story. By noon that same day, my phone lit up with messages asking, "Why are the police at Becca's house? I just saw CPS there. Is everything okay? Did something really happen with her kid?" It wasn't long before the whole block knew what had happened. You don't get a welfare check from CPS with a police escort without people noticing. Charlotte might be a big city, but neighborhoods are small, people talk, and Becca's story began to crumble. Neighbors who heard her version, where I supposedly hit her son with my car and then coldly drove off, started realizing none of it added up. One neighbor, Greg, who lived 2 doors down, texted me, "It's funny, you said you hit him on Friday, but we saw you leave before noon, and you weren't back until after dark." Exactly, because I was at work, like I always am on Fridays. Then things took an unexpected turn. It turns out Becca's lie about me wasn't a one-time thing. She had been weaving a web of stories for months, maybe even years, and people were finally starting to connect the dots. One neighbor, Diane, came straight to my door without knocking, just standing there waiting. "I don't know if you know," she said, "but last month Becca told me you were stealing packages off porches." I blinked at her and said, "Excuse me?" "Yeah," Diane replied. "She told me to keep an eye out because you've been having money problems and we're doing deliveries." I stood there shocked. I'd never heard any of that before. Then I got another text from a different neighbor. Katie said, "Did Becca ever mention you poisoned her cat?" She told me that too. At that point, I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. This woman had been bad-mouthing me all over town for who knows how long, and I was completely in the dark. I thought she was just a little annoying, but no, Becca was on a full-blown campaign, and she wasn't nearly as subtle as she thought. What made it even worse was Mark. After the CPS visit, he went unusually quiet, almost too quiet. He didn't say a word for hours. He just sat in the living room, scrolling on his phone. Finally, I asked him, "Do you still think I should apologize?" Without even looking up, he said, "I didn't think she'd take it this far." That's when I realized something important. Mark knew Becca was like this. He'd just been hoping that if we ignored her, she'd get bored and move on. But she didn't. She kept pushing, testing, and seeing how far she could go. And that night, I caught Mark texting her. I couldn't see the whole conversation, but I caught enough over his shoulder to know he was telling her to clear things up and stop making matters worse. I couldn't believe it. I asked him straight up, "Why are you protecting her?" And all he said was, "She's my sister." I wasn't done yet. The next day, I got a call from Jenna. "You're not going to believe this," she said. Apparently, during the CPS visit, Becca made an offhand comment about how the bruise wasn't even that bad anymore, even though her kid didn't have a single mark. CPS doesn't mess around with that, so they pulled school and medical records to double-check. And guess what they found? There were 3 other times in the past year when Becca had taken her kid to urgent care for accidental injuries, just minor stuff, a sprained wrist, a cut on his forehead, a bruise on his ribs, and every time, her story was shaky. One report even mentioned that a nurse was concerned about how vague Becca was being. This meant Becca wasn't just lying about me. She might have been making things up about her own kid, or worse. I didn't even know what to do with that information. Jenna told me that CPS was opening a deeper investigation, and it wasn't just about a fake driveway incident anymore. Now they were digging into Becca herself. The thing is, Becca had no idea that I knew about her. She was still posting on Facebook like nothing happened, dropping passive-aggressive comments about fake friends and jealous people trying to ruin her life. Meanwhile, I was just sitting back, letting the professionals handle it. But the neighborhood wasn't staying quiet that week. 3 different neighbors came forward with their own stories about Becca. CG said she accused his wife of scratching her car. Katie said Becca told her someone had been sneaking into her backyard, and she thought it was me. Diane said Becca once tried to borrow her car, and when she said no, Becca stopped talking to her for months. It was like everyone had been waiting for someone to say aloud what we were all thinking. Becca is a problem. And now that CPS was involved and the cops had been at her door, no one was afraid to speak up anymore. I even heard through the grapevine that Becca was shocked people weren't taking her side. She thought everyone would rally around her, but instead, people started pulling away. They stopped inviting her to backyard cookouts, stopped including her in group chats about block parties. And Mark? He started getting quiet whenever I mentioned her name, as if he knew the truth but didn't want to admit it out loud. But I wasn't finished, not yet. I had an idea, something bigger, something that would ensure Becca couldn't just slip away and start over somewhere else. I discovered something about her lease agreement and her landlord, and once I connected the dots, I realized I had the perfect next move. But I'll save that part for later. Want me to keep going? At this point, Becca was on thin ice. The CPS visit rattled her, and word spread through the neighborhood. People started backing off. She wasn't invited to the usual backyard cookouts or included in group chats about block parties anymore. But Becca isn't the type to just accept defeat. Instead, she doubled down. 3 days after the CPS visit, I woke up to more texts, this time from Mark's family, his mom, his aunt, even his cousin from Asheville, who I barely know. They were all blowing up my phone asking the same thing. "What's going on with Becca? Why did you call CPS on her?" She told them, "You're trying to get her kid taken away." And just like that, Becca had flipped the narrative. Now she was telling her family that I had called CPS out of spite, that I was jealous of her being a mom, that I was trying to ruin her life because, well, I don't have kids of my own. I was speechless. This woman went from lying about me hitting her kid to telling her entire family that I was on a personal vendetta to have her child removed from her home. And Mark? He was completely useless. I mean, I get why she'd be upset. He said, "I swear, I thought I was being punked." You get why she'd be upset. She's dragging my name through the dirt with her whole family. She's lying again. Are you seriously sending her? He didn't answer. At that moment, I realized that while my husband might love me, when it came to Becca, he was spineless. Then, another twist hit me like a brick. That Friday, I came home from work to find a note taped to our front door. It was neatly folded, and all it said on the outside was, "Thought you should know." Inside was a printed out, not handwritten, copy of a long, nasty Facebook post from a private neighborhood group I wasn't even part of. And guess who wrote it? Becca. She had posted a long rant accusing me of harassment. She claimed I had been spying on her family, calling authorities with false reports, and turning the neighborhood against her, all out of bitterness. She even said I had been stalking her son. I felt sick. I read the whole thing 3 times to be sure I wasn't imagining it. She named me directly, tagged me, and told everyone she was seeking legal advice and considering a restraining order. It was beyond anything I thought she was capable of. Becca thought she was clever, posting that in a private group to shield herself, thinking no one else would share it. But she was wrong. Someone from that group printed it out and left it on my door anonymously, no name, no return address, just that simple message, "Thought you should know." And once I had that evidence, my next move became crystal clear. Now, here's where things really get interesting. Remember how I mentioned her landlord? Well, after everything, I finally decided to dig into her living situation. Becca's been in the same house for about 2 years, always bragging about her sweet deal and how she's got a great landlord who never bothers her. But what she never mentioned was that the owner of her house is a guy named Mr. Patterson, retired, quiet, and living about 5 blocks away. I only knew about him because we met once at a yard sale. I reached out casually just to see if he knew what was happening at his property. Apparently, he didn't. When I mentioned that CPS had been called to the home and the police had been involved, he fell silent. He thanked me and hung up. 2 hours later, Diane texted, "The landlord's at Becca's." Apparently, he was pissed. He showed up unannounced, knocked on the door, and demanded to inspect the place. Becca wasn't happy, but legally, she couldn't refuse. According to Diane, it turned into a scene, shouting, slammed doors, and Becca crying on the porch. But wait, there's more. The next day, Diane sent another text, "Check the county records." I didn't understand at first until she sent the link. Guess who hadn't paid rent for 3 months? Becca had been telling everyone her car was in the shop and that repairs left her strapped for cash. In reality, she was just not paying rent, hoping the landlord wouldn't notice, and now he definitely had. Word spread fast. The same neighbors Becca had deceived were now whispering about eviction, CPS, and police at her house. Suddenly, Becca wasn't the victim, she was the problem. And honestly, I hadn't even played my real plan yet. If she thought CPS and the landlord showing up were bad, I had one more move, but I'll save that for later. At this point, Becca had burned every bridge in the neighborhood. People stopped returning her texts. She wasn't invited anywhere. Even the friendliest neighbors kept their distance. Mark barely spoke. CPS was still investigating her, and her landlord was circling like a shark. Then came the final straw. A week after her public Facebook smear campaign against me, the HOA announced a monthly neighborhood meeting. Normally, about 5 people attend, but this time the room was packed, and Becca was there. She arrived late, wearing sunglasses indoors like she was avoiding the paparazzi, dragging her kid along like an accessory. She sat in the back, arms crossed, glaring right at me. I hadn't planned to say anything, really, but as soon as the meeting opened for community concerns, Diane raised her hand and said, "Actually, I think we need to address the false rumors spreading about neighbors. It's gotten out of hand." You could feel the airdrop. All eyes shifted from me to Becca. I wasn't going to speak up, I swear I wasn't, but then Becca laughed. She laughed loud enough for the whole room to hear. That was it. I stood up. I didn't yell or cry, I just laid it all out. I want to set the record straight. I never hit anyone with my car, I never poisoned a cat, and I never stole anything from anyone's porch. I'm done with the lies. The room fell silent. I looked directly at Becca and said, "If you want to accuse me of something, do it to my face right now in front of everyone." Becca smirked and said, "Maybe I would, if it were true." I nodded. "All right, then explain to everyone why CPS found nothing. Explain why your kid is completely unscathed. Explain why you told half the block I'm a thief when no one ever saw me take anything. And explain why your landlord shows up every other day." That wiped the smile off her face. But it wasn't me who finished her off. No, that honor went to Greg. Sitting near the front, Greg piped up, "Hey Becca, didn't you say we dented your car last month, even though we were out of town all week? And Diane, didn't you mention that Katie was sneaking into your yard? Katie, didn't she tell me you poisoned her cat?" It was like popcorn, one lie after another. People began sharing the different stories Becca had spun, each one pointing fingers at someone else. All of it was ridiculous. Becca's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She stood up, grabbed her kid's arm, and snapped, "You're all just jealous," before storming out in front of everyone. She slammed the door so hard that the windows rattled. For a few seconds after, no one spoke. Then Diane said, "Well, I guess that's that," and just like that, the tension broke. People shook their heads and whispered, looking around as if we'd just witnessed the end of a bad movie. Mark didn't say a word during the meeting, but in the car on the way home he finally spoke. Maybe we should check on her, she's probably embarrassed. I almost laughed. Even after everything, his first thought was still about protecting her feelings. I didn't answer him, I just stared out the window the rest of the ride. Once we got home, he went straight to the bedroom, and I heard him shut the door. I stayed in the kitchen, replaying everything in my head. Here's the thing, no one tells you about standing up for yourself against someone like Becca. You think it'll feel good, and part of it does. Getting the truth out there, watching her web of lies unravel in public, with the whole neighborhood seeing her for who she really is, was satisfying. But there was another part that hurt, a part where you realize someone in your own family was willing to ruin your name over nothing, just because you wouldn't give them what they wanted. Just because you said no. And then there's the realization that your husband, the person who's supposed to have your back, never really stood up for you. Not once. Even when his own sister dragged me through the mud, he just sat there telling me to keep the peace. The worst part? I don't even think Becca believes she did anything wrong. In her mind, she's the victim, and we all ganged up on her for no reason. In the days that followed, neighbors stopped me on the street saying, "Glad you spoke up. Sorry we didn't say anything sooner. We've all been dealing with her." And you know what? That part felt good. It made me feel like I wasn't crazy, like I wasn't fighting this alone. But things with Mark were different. He's been quieter, more distant. I think maybe it finally hit him that Becca's behavior is more than just her personality. As for me, I've been thinking hard about what it means to stay married to someone who watched me get dragged through hell and didn't lift a finger. A week after the meeting, Becca's landlord posted an eviction notice on her door, and CPS closed their case with no action, though the files remain open for monitoring. Becca moved in with Mark's mom about 2 towns over, and I haven't heard from her since. Mark and I are now trying to figure things out, and every morning I drive past her old house on my way to work. The place looks quiet now. Sometimes I wonder if she ever really believed it would work, that she could lie her way through life forever. But liars always get caught sooner or later, and when they do, all you have to do is stand up and tell the truth. The rest takes care of itself. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly started to mend. I began receiving quiet nods and sincere thanks from people who had long suffered under Becca's falsehoods. One day, while picking up a cup of coffee from the local diner, I ran into Greg. He leaned in and said, "I just wanted you to know, seeing you stand up changed things around here." We all needed that wake-up call. His words, gentle and genuine, made the heavy days seem a little lighter. Meanwhile, Mark and I had many long, painful conversations. At first, his silence and distance had stung deeply. But one rainy evening, as we sat together on the worn-out couch, he finally confessed, "I was scared. Scared of rocking the boat even more, and I thought keeping the peace meant staying quiet. But I realize now that peace isn't built on silence or false calm." In that moment, we both acknowledged that our relationship had been tested by forces outside our control, and by our own inaction. Over time, Mark made a real effort to stand by me, not just when it was easy, but when it mattered most. Together, we attended counseling sessions and worked on rebuilding trust. I learned that standing up for the truth wasn't just about fighting external lies, it was also about confronting the hidden fractures in the people we love. As for Becca, the eviction notice marked the end of her reign of deception. With her moving away, the neighborhood began to relax, and slowly the wounds started to heal. The HOA organized a few community gatherings to rebuild a sense of trust and unity, and gradually, smiles replaced suspicious glances on familiar faces. In the end, I realized that standing up for myself had not only exposed Becca's lies, but also paved the way for a more honest life. It wasn't about winning a fight or proving someone wrong, it was about reclaiming my truth and building a community where accountability and kindness coexisted. Mark and I, though still healing, found our way back to each other with newfound respect and understanding. And as I drive past that once troubled house each morning, I see it not as a symbol of deceit, but as a reminder that the truth, however hard it might be to speak, will always light the path to resolution.